Yeah, hello and welcome here at a session from Everyday Life of Urban-Rural Relations to Land Recycling, which is moderated by Thomas Zimmermann. I'm Anna Schönheit, and I'm here to first remind you that if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat or at the Wall of Ideas, and I will bring them to the speakers and the moderator, and will implement them in the discussion for you. So yeah, let's start. Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. We have in our session. My name is Thomas Zimmermann. I'm one of the coordinators of the Stadt Urban Rural Plus project. And we do a project in the Leipzig region. So I would have been in Leipzig these days, and I'm very happy for our session because all these three topics, all these three presentations deal with topics we deal in our project too. So we deal with intermunicipal cooperation. We deal with, we should deal with trade-off regimes, and brownfield development should also be a topic in our region. So we will have these three presentations by Alfredo and Pietro that gives an overview of spatial dynamics and strategic planning in metropolitan areas. It's a comparative studies of 10 European regions. Then Paul from the Research Institute for Regional Planning and Urban Development gives some insight into successful trade-off regimes. And then we are very happy that Nova is with us from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and she will give us some insight into brownfield development in the southeast of the United States. So we will start with Alfredo from the Brussels capital region and Pietro from EUROCITIES, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Thomas, for the floor and to chair this session. I'm Pietro Reviglio from EUROCITIES, and EUROCITIES is the network of major cities in Europe, and we represent European cities, mostly in Brussels, and we have multiple activities, and one of those, it's our working group on metropolitan areas, where we look at how to best metropolitan governance, and where we are constantly trying to understand how we can strengthen urban-rural synergies. And that's the reason why we are here today with my colleague and chair of the working group Metropolitan Areas, Alfredo Corbalan from the Brussels region. And so we decided to participate in this conference because we are really much looking at building better governance structure and better relationship between urban and rural areas. And so maybe this topic might seem, our participation might seem something different, but with our presentation today, we want to show some governance, and we also want to show, let's say, how the European level is looking at urban-rural relationship, and how looking at urban-rural relationships through the lens of metropolitan governance can have added value and can lead to better outcomes. I will leave the floor now to Alfredo Corbalan, who's going to share the presentation and kick off with some remarks about this research project.
Thank you very much, Pietro, for this introduction. Thank you very much, Thomas, for moderating this session. I think we are very glad to be in this Urban-Rural Partnership Conference. I will now start sharing my presentation, hoping that everything will be fine. You should be able to see it now.
Yes, perfect.
Yes, okay, great. I will put in full screen. So yes, as Pietro said, we're gonna speak about spatial planning and governance in European metropolitan areas. I will present you a project we have been involved called SPIMA, and then Pietro will more focus on the EU strategy that can help to better linkages between urban and rural regions, and to strengthen also the governance and the cooperation. So SPIMA, it stands for Spatial Dynamics and Strategic Planning in Metropolitan Areas. Why we decided to do this research project within EUROCITIES? Simply because as this picture of Europe show that Europe is made of different urban nodes which are interconnected between them, and inside of this urban node there are different linkages between big city, medium-sized cities, towns, villages, and urban and rural areas. So this reality, you have different way to show this reality. One, it's the administrative point of view, which is the map on the left, based on the local administrative units. And another way of showing this reality is based more on the functional urban area side, which is the place where people move, live, work, and consume and have leisure. So we can see that there is a mismatch between the administrative city and the real city. And this mismatch has different degrees depending of the cities. But in the range, the real city is most often twice bigger than the administrative city. And this mismatch brings question of governance. How do we implement good governance at this scale? That's also this new scale, metropolitan area, metropolitan regions, is bringing a different changing in the traditional way the power are organized at the national in the members. Traditionally, there are three levels of powers, which is the local, the regional, and the national. And we can see there are a lot of now new on-between level of governance, not necessarily government, but governance, that are appearing at infranational level, cross-border level, infra-regional level, or supra-local level, in order to tackle a new issue like mobility, transport, land use, rural development, and so on and so forth. So that's why when we created the working group in 2013, we decided to have a first study just to have a picture of the different metropolitan governance arrangements in European cities and metropolis. We did these studies with the University of Ghent, and 30 cities across Europe participated from 16 countries. This study shows that the arrangement in governance are very, very different. And also, there are different arrangements according also to different geographical scale. I will not go in details, but that shows, this study showed that metropolitan area, metropolitan governance was a reality and a growing reality, but there was no one size fits all. And then we wanted to, after having these pictures, we wanted to have a more, let's say, analytical analysis to see what are the successful criteria for good governance in strategic and spatial planning at functional urban area level. And what works better in which context, and what could be the role of the European Union. That's why we decided to apply to get funding to make this SPIMA project research, and we applied to the ESPON program. ESPON program, for those which are not very familiar, it's a program financed by the European Union, which makes studies about the spatial development in the EU and the different spatial change and features. So together with 10 cities from the EuroCities, we applied to have this research done. The research was done in 1 year, finished end of 2018, and it was done by 3 research partners with a lead from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. So the main issue of the study was to see how the traditional planning practice can respond to challenges that go beyond administrative border. In the nutshell, or we can develop a sustainable metropolitan development, which is a win-win for the full functional area, by developing good governance of spatial planning in the different dimensions of the spatial planning, the strategic planning, the legal planning, and also the collaborative planning, in order to tackle the main spatial development challenges, speaking about urban sprawl, about housing, about mobility, about preservation of environment and rural land, and so on and so forth. So for that, there was a first phases of course of data collection, a collection also of policies, interviews, workshops with different stakeholders, then analysis of the similarities, the difference between the 10 cities. Finally, policy recommendation for the national and EU level, and policy recommendation for the 10 cities participating. Those are the key findings of this research. I will not go through all of them because we lack of time, but I will develop 2 of them. The first one is that there is no single definition of metropolitan areas. I took the example of Brussels, the city I'm working for. I'm working actually for the Brussels Planning Agency of the Brussels Capital Region. And there are different ways of a definition of metropolitan. You can define the metropolitan area based on the density of the dense urban space, which is the red zone. You can base it on the functional dimension, which is mainly the travel to work zone, which is here in green. But the researcher realized that for spatial planning in the 10 cities, none of this zone was fitting with to tackle the spatial dynamics. And for that, they developed a new, let's say, definition of metropolitan area. They call the metropolitan development area, which is here. You can see it's on the, it's a blue dot zone. And this metropolitan development area takes more into account, let's say, the flows and the different dimensions that are important to tackle the spatial dynamics. Another question important, which is about governance. What works better if it's the governance is it's formal or informal? Within the 10 cities participating, we had the different kind of governance arrangements, going from informal to semi-formal or formal. And the researcher found out that the status of the cooperation is not the critical factor for success, for an effective planning at this scale. But what was more important is to have a kind of framework at the national or regional level that recognize this level, this functional area level, and could give incentives for further cooperation between the different actors. The main recommendation that the research provides for the 10 cities were this question of new redefinition of the metropolitan area that can take better into account the different flows and the different trends of spatial changes in the area. Governance, where we, with a special focus on spatial planning approaches, but also implementing a shared governance process where not one actor only is the main driver, but it's very shared between the different actors of the area, whether they are rural or urban or semi or peri-urban. And to use a mix of tools in the, let's say, a mix of tools in the strategic planning, in the collaborative planning, and also in the legal planning. And the trigger was very much focused on the political leadership. That in all the city show that you need really political leadership in order to tackle this issue of metropolitan governance, and for that, all the partners need to have an awareness that the issue will be better dealt collectively than individually. And of course, as said, also the need of a framework at the national and regional level to allow and incentives the cooperation. And as well, there is the EU can play a role, an important role, but I will let Pietro to go more in detail about that. And then finally, the researcher came with the guidelines for all cities, metropolitan areas in Europe, to develop a metropolitan planning approach. This guidelines is developed around 8 paths that each city has to take into account in order to develop a metropolitan planning approach, going from this question of definition of border to the establishment of a legal or non-legal binding statute, to the identification of the key challenges for the development of the future, or engaging the different relevant actors. Then they made an analysis based on these 8 paths and showing that none of the 10 cities had, let's say, a consistent metropolitan planning approach, and there were different, let's say, space for improvement between the 10 cities. Finally, end up my presentation with the 3 main policy recommendations. First one, it's the rethinking of the metropolitan area delineation with more delineation and the spatial enhancement of the role of spatial planning to tackle the issue, and especially the urban growth. And finally, to enhance also the role of EU that the European Union can play in order to promote a metropolitan agenda and to foster urban-rural cooperation and agreement. I give you the floor now, Pietro.
Yeah, thanks, Alfredo, and thank you for your what I want to say today, it's let's say, how do we link all this that has been said to urban-rural linkages and to the topic of this conference? It's quite important for us as EUROCITIES. We've been pushing for metropolitan areas for a long time because we believe that they were an important tool, a governance tool that can help, solve important challenges that our cities face. And we realize that focusing only on the city on this, and now we are reassessing what we achieved, because of course the EU has a stronger role to play in pushing for these governance structures, and we believe that we need to issues such as the the Green Deal. It's the main, but also now the need to recover from this crisis. The pandemic showed that the interlinkages between urban and rural areas are very important. In very important sectors, we've seen the creation of short supply chain for food supply, also new ways of interpreting mobility, new ways of engaging with the surrounding areas for tourism and leisure. So a lot of interactions are undergoing and are probably going to grow in the future. And moving on, we can see that why we're talking about urban planning at the EU level. You might think that the EU doesn't have much to say on urban planning, and this is something that it's more national, regional. But as we want to show here, there are a lot of ways through which the EU influences urban planning, and here it's just it does so by legislation, a lot on environment, energy, competition, maritime legislation, by setting incentives through cohesion policy, especially rural development policies, transport policy, but also Agenda, and this goes around the meaning of urban development. So with a lot of reports, with a lot of recommendations, and last but not least, there is also strong intergovernmental dialogue where ministries discuss different agendas that they want to bring forward together. So moving on to the next slide. There is this, I don't know if you're familiar with this, overview of the European Green Deal, but you can see that the European Green Deal tries to tackle a lot of challenges that need to be addressed both at the urban and the rural level. And for instance, the transition to a circular economy, the farm to fork strategy, sustainable transport, achieving climate neutrality, all these different policy areas need to be achieved by looking at both urban and rural areas. And the European Union, the European Commission with this new policy agenda is looking at many regulations that will affect this and that will change, the way we move forward. And will also provide a lot of funding opportunities, these new governance models, and also new developments in sectors to strengthen this relationship in the future. Moving to the next slide, we can see that an example of a few of these climate environment priorities that the Commission put forward and is working on and worked already on. This is a bit outdated, but it's just to give you a flavor of what the Commission is working on and how it will affect, the everyday life in urban and rural areas by changing all these rules and by bringing forward action plans. Moving to the next slide, I also wanted to show you a bit an overview of the Territorial Agenda 2030, an intergovernmental document that is exactly targeting urban and rural areas together, regions, and it's focused on the need to respond to the geography of discontent that around Europe. So I don't want to take too much time, but this is just an example of an intergovernmental document which set the policy strategies at the European level, and that impacts somehow the way funds are deployed and the way also policies are done at the European level and then trickle down to national and regional level. Moving to the next slide, it's another example of another strategy that European ministers are going to adopt actually next week. It's going to be the new Leipzig Charter. The Leipzig Charter was this document from 2007, and now it has been renewed to take even more into account the new challenges and the importance of building the transformative power of our cities. And it does so by focusing on different spatial levels of the city, which include the functional area, which is at the basis of metropolitan governance, and which means that we would need, as cities, through functional areas, build better relationship also with the surrounding area. And moving to the next slide is the last, let's say, set of long-term agendas that Europe is working on, which is the long-term rural vision, which I believe many of you will be interested to contribute. This is something that is ongoing, and it's a priority of the new Commission that is trying to create a holistic vision on the future of rural areas and cover challenges like demographic change, connectivity, limited access to services. And it's going to link a lot with a lot of funding opportunities also that will come from the European level and will certainly have an impact on the way policies are done on the ground. Moving to the next slide, as time it's ticking, I just wanted to highlight that also cohesion policy, the next programming period for 2021-2027 will have multiple entry points for urban and rural relationship enhancement, and a lot of billions will come through this fund, which will affect the way cities and the rural areas interact, and it will be doing so by also strengthening a lot investment, integrated territorial investment. So it will push for cities cooperate with the neighboring municipalities to develop an integrated investment strategy, and therefore connecting the urban and the rural priorities with a holistic view in different sectors, very important, such as waste management, mobility, infrastructure development, food also supply, so many things. Moving to the next slide, I want to just give also a glimpse of something else that is happening at the European level, which is a mission on cities to make 100 climate neutral cities by 2030. And this is an ambitious task that will only be achieved if you strengthen this relationship. So
Pietro, you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, this leads me to my last point, which is going to some open question. We want to state that cities are not islands, and we would like to hear from you. I mean, the discussion time is little, but how can we develop better urban-rural linkages via stronger metropolitan governance? What sectors to bring forward to do this? How can we develop a cooperation framework for a win-win scenario, and how to make the best of EU policy and funding opportunities to develop coherent investment strategies? So I would like to leave you with this, and maybe we can discuss it for the few minutes we have left. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Alfredo and Pietro, for your presentation. Maybe you can just leave on the question, so that could be a starting point for our discussion. Anna, are there already questions from the MEA app?
At the moment, unfortunately not. No.
Okay.
But this gives you the space to discuss. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the other presenters? No. So then maybe I have a question to the first. I mean, I'm more to Alfredo. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on this metropolitan development area, this term? How did you define this area in your project? And was it kind of a space, or that you kind of analyzed empirically for all these 10 regions in order to give like a common understanding of what in a metropolitan area is?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, actually, the metropolitan development area was tailor-made. Each city explained the area, the best area to tackle the issues from let's say, a territorial perspective on spatial planning. And altogether, each city use its own way of defining. So it's tailor-made. It's not based on let's say typology, and so that the result came out that they were not fitting with the normal typology of functional or morphological urban area. So it was very tailor-made delineation, based on the point of view, of course, of the core cities. Some they use more travel for Brussels. We used the new S-Bahn region, because there is an S-Bahn to be developed, and will connect in a radius of 40 kilometers around the cities. And for us, we said that this was the real metropolitan development area to tackle the coming issue of daily life of the inhabitants.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any questions yet?
We now have some. We have one question, and this asks for the following: why most territorial funding instruments from 2014 to 2020 failed?
So I think it's probably for
Pietro.
Pietro.
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, I think, Alfredo, you can also come back on that. And I think, for instance, integrated territorial investment for cohesion policy were quite successful in certain countries, and in specific contexts, especially in European countries, Poland, the Czech Republic, successful. Unfortunately, this integrated investment and this instrument to build this integrated approach to investments can be improved and hopefully will be improved in the next programming period. But the reality is that I don't want to go too technical because maybe not everyone is familiar with those. But the point being that there is some reluctance to have these investment approaches because, of course, authorities are not so always open to share, let's say, power, and the sharing power. It's the main, you know, driver of this cooperation. But the reality is that I think what some forward-looking authorities are understanding is that many of the challenges we're facing need to be addressed at the integrated level, and having this silo approach, having this, let's say, not openness to work with other municipalities to develop these investments will affect the quality, effectiveness of the investment on the territories. Maybe Alfredo, you want to comment on that?
Yes, quickly. I would not say that they failed. I mean, where they were implemented, they were quite successful. In some cities where there was no metropolitan cooperation at all, they could boost the metropolitan cooperation, as you said, for instance, in Poland and in Czech Republic. Where they failed, it's because it was optional for the member state to decide to use EU funds for better urban-rural linkages, and only few member states use it. But when they were used, there have been quite successful success stories to present. And so we hope that for the next 21-27 programming period, more member states will take this opportunity to use EU funds for this purpose. But as Pietro said, and as I show in one of my slides, the problem that this metropolitan or this functional level, there are some fears from the traditional level of power, which are national, regional, to lose control and to be in competition with this new level of action.
Okay, thank you. Now, is there another question, Anna?
Well, it's not a question, but there are two comments.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good. So both comments are given like a little outlook on the problem. And it says better understanding of each other characteristics, developing a shared vocabulary. The Aspen Imagine project is a good example of developing a common narrative balancing urban and, oh, now this person commented again, and rural. And then it goes on, urban-rural relations differ a lot in the various regions in Europe. There's definitely no one-size-fits-all approach possible for this. In addition to Alfredo, it shows again that on a national level, the understanding of these matters is not really developed. The regional and cities authorities can much better bring forward. And then we have another comment from Dr. Uwe Ferber. Integrated funding is key. Let's promote good examples.
Okay, let's keep that in mind. And good examples is a good slide slide to Paul, who is elaborating on successful trade-off regimes that could be a tool for establishing metropolitan governance. So we are looking forward to your presentation, Paul.
Thank you. Can you all see?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thanks to all. As Alfredo just mentioned, the challenge of how to deal with rising cross-border interactions is the development of the balance between cities and the surrounding areas. So therefore, in this presentation, we'll look at criteria for successful trade-off regimes in intercommunal land regimes. To intercommunal, I will also refer as intermunicipal or shorter interlocal, because one of them is easier to pronounce than the other. My name is Paul Goede. geographer and researcher at the Research Institute for Regional and Urban Development in Dortmund. I do research about these trade-off regimes and how to balance metropolitan areas and the surroundings with one another. So basically, what we're looking at today in this presentation, we talk about trade-off mechanisms. And for this purpose, we'll later classify systems and approaches to cooperation and select specific types of trade-off regimes to analyze with real examples to learn from. Regarding the agenda, I will first give a bit of context about the project, because in the Stadtland Plus initiative, we have the project NILA in the region Bonn-Rhein-Sieg-Ahrweiler, and from this perspective, we are looking at other regions to learn from. The second point is why trade-off regimes matter and what they are. Then we'll classify them. Then we'll look at criteria for success of such regimes in strategic intercommunal land regimes, and I will refer to sustainability and strategic as words also. And the last point will the further field of research to do. First of all, where we are based with our project, this is the region Bonn-Rhein-Sieg-Ahrweiler. They have been involved in informal regional cooperations for more than 25 years. In this region, we experience strong cross-border interactions. It's a very prosperous region. And that's why in some points we already observe that the remaining land reserves are completely exhausted. So there's no room more left for housing and commercial areas. We don't only have growth, but we also have stagnations and shrinking side by side, especially in the peripheral regions. So the goal of the region is to build now a sustainable strategic regional land management, which is much more comprehensive and binding than the informal cooperation that we are based on now. And this sustainable land management will involve also a trading of system about balancing costs and benefits of settlement development within the region. So what are trade-off regimes and why do they matter? You all know examples of regions getting together, as we have seen today in many of the sessions, regions where cities and villages gather to draw a regional development concept, to limit land use, to steer urban development in the right direction. But what most of these concepts struggle to implement is the regulatory environment. It's the same thing in Germany as I think in many other countries, is that this environment promotes ruinous interlocal competition for inhabitants, for commerce, to earn more tax money. And this is known as the prisoner's dilemma, meaning for one single municipality, it makes always sense to give more land, to allow more land use, even if for the whole region, it doesn't really matter. I mean, in terms of that the whole quantitative land use is way too high. So many costs of these settlement development goes beyond the extent we should allow, and a lot of it is not externalized. It's externalized. For example, ecological problems of land use development is externalized. Then in Germany we have this 30-hectare goal, and even more. We should have we do have the net zero goal even, and we are very far from reaching the goal that we will not use more than 30 new hectares in all Germany per day. Trade-off regimes also seek to minimize the risks of settlement development. So if we can balance the consequences of settlement development, especially the costs of it, we can expand the scope of action for smaller and poorer municipalities to develop in their scope. And finally, trade regimes want to ensure the implementation of regional development concepts and to allow for more commitment and avoid free rider phenomena, which is more binding rules and accepting a system without some municipalities limiting their development, while other municipalities just stay out and say, we will allow for all the commerces to come to us, which you don't allow to use your land, you know? So this free rider phenomena is a big, big problem. In order to analyze trade-off regimes, we need to classify them first. The purpose is to suggest a new classification that promotes sustainable development. What do I mean with sustainability? I'm tackling two meanings here. One is an adequate plan for a region which ensures a sensible development and reasonable use of the scarce resource land. But secondly, also a sustained development in the terms of a continuous membership of all involved municipalities, a long-term cooperation, and a continuous management. So not only do we want to manage a region with a plan that the consumption of land resources match with the actual development that we expect, but also we want to design the whole system in a way that no municipality leaves the cooperation and all stick to the rules they have given themselves. The thesis is that you always need two dimensions to achieve this. One is that you need trade-off mechanisms that balance costs and benefits of settlement development. The other dimension is that you need a sustainable spatial strategy. That is, a vision of sustainable development in quantitative and qualitative terms. There is a good new matrix that I have developed that allows structuring the different kinds of trade-off regimes that we can observe. You see again of the last slide, the trade-off mechanisms and the sustainable spatial strategy. The horizontal axis is the presence of a sustainable strategy, and the vertical is the redistribution of resources, meaning the degree of it. Look at the top left corner. There you have common information bases or joint site marketing. Examples for this would be a common register of vacant lots in the region or brownfield sites, or two municipalities market their land together. So here you have not yet a complete, comprehensive, sustainable spatial strategy, and you don't have any redistribution of resources. The next level would be to the bottom, that you have distribution of resources. For example, an interlocal commercial area or a regional tax redistribution system where the cost and benefits of land development is shared between municipalities, but without any quantitative limit of it and without any spatial strategy. And if you go to the right, you have regional development concepts that we all know, but without any redistribution of resources. That could be a common land use plan. That could be a project-based concept, but without any common budget to finance it. So the most development ones are the bottom right, regional concepts with trade-off mechanisms, e.g. a settlement development with a regional fund, for example. And then there's special cases which are a bit in between everything. That could be, for example, mutually provided infrastructure without fiscal redistribution. For example, one city extends the bus line and the other city expands school building, or one city says, you know, we share the kindergarten, we have the kindergarten and the next finances school, but there's no fiscal redistribution. And the other special case is that you have quantity-based caps for quality-based criteria. for example, an ecological compensatory tool or a land use pool with growth limit. So if you look at regional concepts with all of this kind, you can see that you have a lot of concepts like interlocal commercial areas, and you have many concepts with regional concepts, but without redistribution. Most of the attempts you can find is without both, without spatial strategy and without redistribution. And only a very, very few attempts try to do both. So what we will define now here is that we will look only at those because they have the minimum requirement to tackle the dilemmas I addressed before in the other slide. Please note that all other questions, e.g. the legal form of it or the degree of liability, they are secondary here now, yet subject to a later analysis. So why do we find such few examples? Is there no need for them? I think probably not. Because competition-oriented regulatory environment leads to growth dilemmas, as I have laid out earlier. So there's a lot of attempts to establish such regional cooperations. And the topic of sustainable land management and trade-off regimes is now on everybody's lips. We know that we want to build up such elaborate concepts. But why are they so few then? So I think it is because it's extremely difficult to establish them. So the purpose of today is examining factors for the success of them. I have a working hypothesis, which is that the more commitment you have in a system, the more you can guarantee that it can become sustainable, meaning that sustainability mechanisms will have effect. But the more you do, the less support you get from municipalities, because they don't want to lose their local autonomy. So the attention is to dissolve the seeming dichotomy of those. Because if you look at this, if this is really true here, we will never achieve such a system which both has the support of the municipalities and is sustainable. So the acceptance is what you can see at the left with under support, and the sustainability is the other dimension here. Very important that today we'll only look at the acceptance as the dimension of success. The other we will look at later research. You can analyze the support short-term by the accession, means that municipalities get together in a system, and in long-term that they remain in such a system. The dimensions of sustainability you can analyze by short-term process analysis, means that you can look at the mechanisms and do we expect that they lead to less land consumptions? And the long-term, you want to look at the impact of them, meaning have they really, can we really measure that they consume, for example, less land consumption? So today we only look at the support. The approach that we choose is to select trade-off regimes in Germany which match the criterion. That means they have a spatial strategy and trade-off mechanisms. As I said, they are really, really few. The first step was a literature review, meaning the collection of essential conditions in the emergence of the interlocal land management regimes. It will be complemented by deeper investigation and expert interviews, but this is still in progress. And now finally, I can present you the learnings that we have so far. We can identify fundamental conditions and additional facilitators. The fundamental conditions that we all know from literature is sufficient spatially grounded interrelation. That means that they need to be spatially close to another to identify a common need for action. Common problem awareness. Sufficient personal resources to carry minimal transaction costs. Sufficient political will. And enough trust and a respectful communication at eye level, even between the big cities and the small villages. But this, what I presented here, you can see in all literature about all kinds of interlocal cooperation systems. That means also limited systems with a common informational pool, but no redistribution mechanisms. They all have these fundamental conditions. Otherwise, they don't cooperate. But if we want to achieve the more developed systems, the few that we looked at now in the research, you seem to need more. And the more results in the benefits of the cooperations must strongly outweigh the transaction costs. Because with more redistribution of resources, you have higher transaction costs and less willingness of the municipalities to cooperate. Then you need effective yet adhesive organizational structure. That means the structure must be very effective in decision making, but it must be adhesive enough to sort of glue together all of them in order that no one tries to get out of the cooperations early enough. The next one is the remnants effects, which raise cost of defection. What is meant by that? A remnants effect is that if you have already managed to build a cooperation structure, it gets more and more difficult to get out of it if you're already in it, because you're involved in it, you have invested resources, you are already profiting from this or that benefit. So it's very hard to get out. It's a bit like in the European Union. Maybe some of the member states sometimes, you know, tend to be like more or less amused about parts of the cooperations in the European Union, but still everything is so matched together that it's very, very hard to get out of it. And this is a good measure also against the free rider phenomenon. The next point is exterior pressure or facilitation. That could be, for example, a very restrictive subordinate authority like regional planning institution, which already restricts the land use possibilities, but promises more possibilities to develop the region if the local authorities get together and work in informal concepts. And most of the analyzed approaches, this has been critical. And last but not least, we need a reasonable scope of cooperation and avoid idealization. What is meant by that? A lot of planners tend to have very, very big ambitions. They want the municipalities to work together in all kinds of sectoral and sectoral aspects, and also in all kinds of areas of politics. And they also want them to share a vast amount of taxes and redistributions. Sometimes this goes too far. So we need to avoid idealization and try to really measure the means of cooperation mechanisms, to tailor them really to a reasonable scope of cooperation and not to exaggerate. What would be learnings for the RAC region and also for other regions? Because the main concern we have here is to transfer it to other development systems.
Paul, could you please come to an end?
Yes, sure. First of all, we can see that in the RAC region, as in many other regions, the fundamental conditions are already there. They are given because otherwise this would not have come to existence. But the additional facilitators, that needs to be figured out. And this will be a valuable input for other regions. Last slide, further fields of research would be appropriate trade-off designs to ensure sustainability, and optimal spatial sites and extent for cooperation regions. We want to explore sets of instruments for a variety of problem situations, the role and dimensions of spatial equality. We want to suggest new innovative trade-off instruments to produce higher acceptance without losing sustainability efficacy. And lastly, we want to explore the role and variety of different instruments concerning benefits and costs. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Paul. It was a good presentation. It's always nice to structure and to find a to kind of classify the regimes. Anna, are there any questions yet?
No, not yet. But I will inform you. We just have like a little link on the project Zukunft Stadt Stadtland Plus and Nila.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
But Alfredo has a question.
Yes, thank you, Paul, for this presentation. Very interesting to see this development of trade-off regimes between different local authority. I was wondering, in the example, you said there are very few ones where you have a trade-off regime plus a sustainable spatial strategy. I was wondering, I don't know if in your research you could see what were in this example the main trigger that make it possible.
You mean in the regimes that we have analyzed?
Yes, yes. If there were a factor that said, okay, there was really a need, what was the main trigger to say that, okay, let's go for a strategy and a trade-off regime?
Yes, indeed. The most important factor is that in these cases you had an already very restrictive regional planning authority, which restricted the measure of development of housing, especially for most of the villages, because they didn't have a growth perspective. And this regional development authority allowed them more flexibility if they organized themselves in informal concept, which they had now afterwards then with setting up a regional development plan, identify areas where they want to concentrate regional development, and then setting up a system where, for example, the villages need to pay an amount of money if they develop housing outside of the inner city centers. And this goes into a regional fund and is then redistributed to promote sustainable regional development. Yeah. So restrictive public authority, subordinate authority is really a big thing.
Okay, we sorry, we have another question from Dr. Isabella Lehmann, and she says, as the participation of municipalities in those concepts is voluntary and there exists a strong incentive to free ride, isn't the inclusion of all municipalities in the sphere of expected effects a primary condition? How could this be ensured?
We just need to think. To be honest, I don't really get like the core of the question. Do you? Is including all municipalities, like whether it's the primary condition that all of them are included, which are in the region, in the area. Right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a very good question, and I'm afraid I cannot give a definite answer yet. This is one of the main research objects. But what I can say already is that there is thoughts about how you can design a system in a way that either it doesn't matter if some municipalities don't take part, and it's sufficient to have a starting coalition of the willing. And so like the advantages and the benefits like sort of like radiate out, and they all see, oh, it's very good, I want to join. And or that you can design it in the way that it doesn't really matter if some of them do not join. Yeah. But no definite answer here, no final answer on this.
Okay. Is there another question? No. So maybe there comes something up in the final discussion.